relationship with her hasn't been damaged by an honest assessment of her performance in my class. I'll see you again next semester, she says. What a remarkable story.
Thank you.
Kind of liked it. It is, in many respects, having been at Berkeley for almost 3 years now, a typical story. You're quite right. Our students, who are fundamentally musicians, I think, get annoyed if we expect them to put in what he correctly insists, the necessary and sufficient effort to pass the class, if this question is imposed on them against doing it in liberal arts. Mm-hmm. Whereas they are privy to expect it, and some of them even push it to perfection if it's done against the music courses that they take. And what I liked it, the way you handled it. You did two things. You established a very stern standard, but you communicated it to her gently. And the way the story ends is also remarkable. And she might probably have meant what she said, that she's going to come back and prove you otherwise.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. So how often does this happen at Berkeley, do you think?
As you say, it happens fairly frequently that students resent having to put in time outside of the music because that's their passion, their primary passion. And particularly when they first come to us at Berkeley, it's not always clear to us or to them just how important the liberal arts and other studies are to their music. And as they go along, I think some discover that it's very important and others remain walled in to their perception of music as being all-encompassing. But what I like about music students as compared to other students I've had in other institutions, what's different is that they understand honest feedback. Because you can't become the excellent musicians that they are before they come to college without having been told you didn't work hard enough this time, you haven't been practicing, look what you could do if you worked a little bit harder, that sort of thing. So that's a big advantage that they have over the other kinds of undergraduates that I've had in many other institutions who've been told always you're doing very well and you're an excellent student, but they haven't been challenged and they haven't had an honest report all the time about what they're writing.
But so, don't you sometimes feel guilty, Doug, because there is a sense in which I do, for us to insist on these particular students who are fundamentally musicians to take liberal arts courses seriously? Why should they, Doug?
Well, they should do that because we're a college. And the way I feel about that is that what I do with my students in liberal arts has to be tailored to their overall program. So I don't expect them to have as much time as students elsewhere might have to read, so that we have to approach it with the different types of reading and different style and different quantities of reading perhaps. But I do expect them to buy into the notion that all the arts are related and that they should be reading as listeners and listening to the music of the text and evaluating the words, appreciating them in the same way that they appreciate music. And I also tell them writing is an instrument, language is an instrument, you don't get anywhere without practicing. So I sometimes feel bad about imposing all this work on them when because they're up at 3 o'clock in the morning doing their recordings.
Exactly.
And they need to practice. If they're performance majors, they do need to practice several hours a day. And so it's a very demanding schedule. On the other hand, I think that usually they appreciate it if I can find the right materials for them to read. And that takes time to find materials that intrigue them enough that they want to work their way through them and then try to make the connections.
And how do you handle this question of gigs, as our students like to call it, these frequent disappearances that sometimes last about a month because they are traveling either as leaders of a band or as members of a band or as remotely connected to it in any other conceivable shape and form, and they will have to disappear. When they do this to you, Doug, how do you handle it?
Well, it seems to me that my students are very mature And since most of them are performers already and have had experience of being out in the world, many of them, these ones that go off to jazz festivals, like I had a student this week who just got back from a jazz festival
Yes, me
in
too.
his country, and he missed the first 2 weeks of classes, so now he's a bit behind the eight
Yes.
ball, and he has to catch up. That may be hard, maybe it'll be beyond him, but if he makes his effort, I'm sure he'll get by.
You get by.
But what I always tell them is that it's up to them to decide how they want to prioritize their time and their energies. And if they've reached a point in their career when they need to play, and they need to take a gig, or they need to go off and play in a festival, then I support that. But I also tell them at the same time exactly what impact it'll have on their academic work and what they can expect. So I try to give them an idea of what the outcome might be, and then talk to them a little bit about whether that's what they really want. Do they want to apportion their time in that way? And every so often, every couple of semesters, I have someone who does go away to a contract or to tour or something like that and decide to leave school, which I support fully. As long as they understand how those things work together and they have their own priorities straight, I don't have any problem with that.
And now we're going to return to student concerns momentarily. But before I move elsewhere, let me ask you one final important question, namely your views on the relationship between the possibility of producing a good musician and the role of liberal arts in the sculpting of the musician. How important is the training in liberal arts at the
Well, to me, it's essential. We have to remember that, particularly at Berkeley, in the context that we work in, that most of our students are not going to end up being primarily performers. Though they're going into music business, they're going into music therapy, they're going into all kinds of fields that are related to music, but they won't be necessarily deriving their primary or making that their primary occupation as a performer. So for those people, and also for performers, it's absolutely essential that they be able to place their work in the context of the world that we live in. And I just think that to be only a musician, just as to be only anything else, is to limit yourself and not to understand the world.
So the idea of Berkeley producing what my students call the perfect music machine is simply not enough for you.
No, and it's also one of the weaknesses, I think, of the education at Berkeley. If the students are too extensively focused on technical mastery